Ah, it's nice to sit down.
No, we haven't gotten any guidance yet. I just have been presuming that we're exposed to the markets like everybody else, and it's a large percentage. I don't actually know. It's very heavy in our book budget, materials budget, the amounts that's endowment. The staff budget is not particularly endowment related. That's mostly
Stanford's has to do a 5% cut next year.
Oh, they do, for sure.
Yeah, and the year after. They have to produce budgets that are. Oops. Wow.
I don't know whether it was my standing here or Russell Robinson walking in that caused everyone to be so quiet. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Dick Danner, and I want to welcome you to our program this afternoon, which is one of a series of programs that we are doing at the law school in celebration of the new building, the new space, all the things that we've done. So for this program, which is going to focus on the law library, and I certainly hope that you will all join us later on for the reception in the library, take a chance to walk around and take a look at it. For those of you who are alumni of the school, I think you'll find it's a transformed space. And we have a lot of people here who have seen the old library, and I think you'll see it's quite a different thing than what we had before. So I want to welcome everyone here, faculty, students, staff of the Duke Law School, the staff of the J. Michael Goodson Law Library who have joined us here today. I'm not going to name all the names, but I can see and I know that there are many of our prominent alumni here in the audience, benefactors of the library and of the building project. I want to thank Russell Robinson for being here, representing not only his status as one of our favorite alumni, but also as the chair of the Duke Endowment, which gave generous support for this project, particularly for the library. Unfortunately, the library's benefactor, J. Michael Goodson, for whom the library is now named, can't be with us this evening, but we do hope to see him tomorrow at other dedication weekend events. I want to welcome also members of the University Libraries Advisory Board who are joining us tonight. I want to welcome our architects from our firm in Boston, Shepley, Bulfinch, and Richardson, and especially Jeff Freeman, whose initial designs and insight were, at least to my mind, and I think to others as well, crucial to the success of the library renovation. I want to welcome members of our construction team, from our contractors, and from the university. I certainly want to say a few words to welcome Professor Tom Metzloff, whose imagination created the vision for this building as we see it, and whose dedication brought all the projects that we worked on to fruition. I'm happy to see that there are many law librarians here from across the country, including former members of the Duke Law Library staff and Duke Law School alumni who have gone on to distinguished careers in law librarianship. I'm also happy to see a number of members of the law library staff who are now retired, all of whom retired at very young ages, and they know how I feel about that. But they've come back to celebrate with us today. I want to welcome two librarians from the Duke community, including my colleague Deborah Jacobs, our university librarian, and others as well. I want to welcome and thank for being here my son Zach, my daughter Kat, Zach's girlfriend Miria, and her father Carrie, who have given up their afternoons to come with us today. We're here this afternoon to have a conversation. And for that conversation, I'll be joined by two distinguished colleagues. And what we want to do today is to speak for a bit among the three of us and then speak with you. We want you to participate in this as well. What we want to do is to talk about the role of the academic law library in legal education. And while we're waiting to start the program, while we were standing up here in front of the room, someone came up to me and said, "Why do we have law libraries anymore? You know who you are." And I said, "It's a good thing you're here, Dave, because that's what we're going to talk about." And it's an interesting question, because questioning the role of the library, particularly of the law library, is something that might have been unthinkable 15 or 20 years ago when many of the people in this room went to law school. But it's something that's now prompted by what we in the business know as the tremendous challenges that law libraries and other libraries have faced as the information we collect and organize and make available has moved from largely print formats to largely digital formats. And so there is a question to ask about, why do we need libraries? Why do we need law libraries in this new digital world? Why should we care about books when so much of the information that lawyers use and need, law students and scholars use, is online, accessible anytime, anywhere, in many instances, to any one. Why do we build new law libraries? Why do we rip them apart and rebuild them entirely from the inside? And why should law schools with resource needs in many areas continue to devote large sums to develop and maintain their libraries? So is what we are here today to celebrate really worth it? Now, I don't want to keep you in suspense because the conclusion is going to be, of course it's worth it. Yes. And, I'm quite sure that the continuing value of the law library is clear to my colleagues who will be with us this afternoon, but let's hear what they have to say. Their biographies are in the printed program, so I won't say much by way of introduction about them. Blair Kauffman is the law librarian and professor of law at the Yale Law School. Blair and I have been friends since we were both law librarian pups, which was a while ago. And I told him that I would resist the temptation to say all of the things that I could about him here in this introduction. But Blair is one of, I think, our most thoughtful colleagues as a law librarian. And in many ways, the conversation that we'll have today is a variation on a conversation that Blair and I have been having probably for many, many years together. John Palfrey is the Henry N. S. III Professor of Law and Vice Dean of Library and Information Resources at the Harvard Law School, a position to which John was appointed earlier this year. In addition to the accomplishments that are listed in the program, John is also the co-author of the recent book, Digital Natives, which is a fascinating discussion of the impacts of digital technologies on the lives of the new generations who were born into and raised in the digital world, who have known nothing but a world of computers and networks. It's worth noting too, perhaps, that John comes into his new position at Harvard without prior experience as a law librarian. So our plan today is to talk for a while and then take your questions. And as you know, there will be a reception in the Goodson Library itself, which will follow. And we hope, of course, that you'll join us there as well. So with that, we'll begin.
Great. Do we just begin talking?
I've already warned John that our major challenge here is going to keep Blair from talking too much.
Okay, so let me go first.
He doesn't need a question.
Okay, go first.
Go first. You don't even ask. I think you already threw out the question, Dick. But first, let me say what a privilege it is for me to be here. Those of us in the library profession have long admired Duke Law School and the Duke Law Library. It is always, if we want to find out how to do something right, we look at Duke. We always know that Duke is one step ahead of everybody else. So recently, open access digital repositories. We can look to Duke, see what they've done.
Well, that's a matter of contention with Harvard. So we can't really
no contention. You did it first. It's all yours.
They've done it, and Dick's written about it. How do you serve this new generation of legal scholars that are doing empirical legal research? Look to Duke and see what they're doing, and they definitely are doing something there. So the rest of us that are just beginning to struggle with some of these major issues in librarianship can look at Duke. And those of you that don't already know this, you should be very proud of what's happened here at Duke. And I'm really happy to be here and to see the Duke Law School for the first time. So let me say that, of course, Duke is not the first to renovate and add something to their library. Over the past decade, a good portion of us have done major law library renovation and addition projects. John and I are both beneficiaries of major renovation projects that occurred in the late 90s at Harvard and Yale. Institutions that had long neglected the infrastructures of their libraries. I know at Yale, it was, I think from the time that it was built in 1929, 1930, it had been deferred maintenance. And we invested heavily in it in the late 90s. And ever since that renovation, we've seen increased usage of the library every year following the renovation. More recently, Stanford, I just was down at Stanford spending some time with Paul Lomio and looking at their recently renovated library, and their usage has more than doubled over the past 5 years, I believe. So that's fairly impressive. Chicago just completed a renovation project of its library. I think these are strategically wise decisions for law schools to be making. It's money well spent. Even though we've got this born digital generation of students entering our law schools that John has written about, it's interesting that they tend to be even higher users of libraries. My book monitors that guard the entrance to the Yale Law Library tell me that our current 1Ls are the heaviest library users they've seen yet. So it's just an interesting situation that during this digital age, students are flocking to libraries. And I think it's because libraries, as Dick has pointed out in previous talks, because he touches on everything, that libraries are what architects call this third place, where your home is your first place, an office or a classroom is second place, and social places like dining halls and lounges and coffee shops and bookstores and libraries are a third place. And the library is that third place that speaks to individual study and research. And it's the one thing that really distinguishes residential education from other types of education during this digital era where you can go online and learn. Concord University offers a JD degree that can be done totally online. But a library is what holds the students to the law school. They spend more time in the libraries than they do in the classrooms. They're maybe in the classroom 3 hours a day. They might be in the library 6 to 10 hours a day. So it's a wise decision. We've seen in the law schools that invested in their renovation projects that usage is up more than ever. And what they're doing in their in the libraries is something else that I will address in a minute, I guess.
Oh, I hope so.
If I have time.
We will hope to get back to you. Thanks, Blair, for the comments and for getting us started on the discussion. I want John to talk, but what I was actually going to ask a question,
okay.
And you kind of gave a good introduction to it because one of the things that we found here, and this was the case in this library before we closed it down and did this renovation, and has been the case since we reopened it a couple of months ago. There's a lot of student use of the library. It's a pleasant space. The students are there. They use the carrels. They use the table seating. They're all over the place. And that's what we want. The students seem to like the new space. We built it for them. That's what we want to see. But what, besides providing space for students, is the role of the research or the academic law library? Because you could make an argument, that's right, you got to have great spaces for students to sit around in, do their work, have access to technology, and do all of those things. And as Tom Metzloff well knows, we built this commons space. And Tom, I hope he's not terribly serious about this, but he regularly expresses his disappointment about the fact that there are so many students in the library and not in the commons. But at some level, it's having that space, having good workspaces, having power to the tabletop, having wireless access to technology. That doesn't have to be in the library. So I guess I think that the bigger question for us is really, what is there beyond providing beautiful study hall space that the library is supposed to do under this new environment? And I want to hear your thoughts especially, but I think John should have a shot at this too.
Nice. Thank you, Dick. And thank you so much for the honor of being up here. I'm not even a pup librarian. I didn't go to library school, and I have this great opportunity to be a library director. And in addition to being kind of the new kid on the block, I also, as I was trying to figure out how to start this job, I asked people, where are great things happening in academic law libraries, and virtually every road led back to Duke. Almost everybody said, look to what Dick Danner is doing there, and it's clear just walking around your beautiful new library that this is a physical expression, a manifestation of the wonderful things you've been doing, and your scholarship is a great guide to a rookie law librarian like me. I come at this as a technologist, really, or a person who studies technology and the law, and got interested, actually, in the role of libraries because of what I was seeing young people doing with the technology. So over 3 or 4 years, I did this research project on digital natives, resulting in a book called Born Digital, which looks at how young people use these technologies in ways that are different from their parents and grandparents. And of course, it's not everybody using it the same way. You know, there are variations within the population, but certainly those people who are born after 1980, who have access to technology and some skill in this, clearly do rely on digital technologies much more than books. I think it is absolutely the case that our students are less likely to go like this and pull a book off the shelf than they are to go online and look for something, right? So in our focus groups and interviews with young people, particularly the ones who are now in high school, we were asking them, if you had a research project, you're supposed to look up something you don't know much about. So we would ask them, you know, Spanish-American War, you have to do a research project on it. 100 out of 100 kids that we asked said they would start by opening their laptop or some other digital device, right? They would go to Google every single time, not Yahoo or some other search engine. They would type in Spanish-American War, hit enter. They would then get a set of search results, and the top one would be Wikipedia, or the third one would be Wikipedia. They click on that, and they go to the Wikipedia page. Really, almost everybody in our sample said this exact process. And the only variation that we got was then that some would cut and paste the top of what they found into their research paper and then hand that in. That was the not sophisticated way to do it. And then the other end of the spectrum, there were the skeptical kids, the kids who thought, gee, my classmate could have been here 5 minutes before on Wikipedia and made some edits to it to mess me up and introduce some false fact, so I don't believe any of this, right? So you had this huge range of sophistication in terms of the response to it. And what we found was kids really do suffer from information overload, the notion that there are so many different sources to rely on. And I would ask the younger ones, about libraries. Did you ever think to go to a library? And by and large, they would only go to the library if they were assigned to do it. You have to cite a book. Their instinct was to go to these digital sources. One kid looked at me and said, man, no, I've never been to. Wait a minute, I did go to a library once. It was on a field trip. Mm-hmm. So some kids are being introduced to libraries as field trips. And where it came out after listening to these kids in these interviews was they need more than ever excellent guidance on how to do research, on how to sort through these multiple sources that they're getting online. So it's not that we just need to give them an internet browser in the middle of a law school environment somewhere in a lovely commons as a place to sit. It's that we need to structure environments, actually. So I totally agree that having physical space as a manifestation of the intellectual kind of heartland of the school is crucial. But I also think there's a growing role for the academic law librarian. And it's not just reference librarians, it's people in the back office too who are figuring out how to catalog and make this stuff accessible. So just as you lead this push toward open access of faculty scholarship, we need to let kids know how to find that faculty scholarship and then to distinguish between a source that's online from another kind of source. So I actually think that the fact that young people are going to Google and to Wikipedia first is a call to arms in a way. It's a requirement that law librarians have a greater role in legal education. I don't want us to send Harvard Law School students out in the world thinking that a keyword search is the way to look up a statute or to figure out where a law journal is. We, in fact, need more than ever to give that structured experience in a way that I think that they risk missing today.
Okay. You have a comment?
Well, that's right. I think that even these teenagers that are going to the Wikipedia to find answers for their research papers might make it all the way through college and actually get admitted to Harvard and Duke and Stanford and
maybe
the other
Yale or, no,
and Yale
it's just so hard to get in. They can't even hope that.
And still think that you can just find it all by going onto Google. And we're finding that that's the case with many of these students, and they'll just come into the library and use the library as a study hall unless we intervene and teach them otherwise, that there's actually, I call it assertive reference, because fewer and fewer students come to the reference desk on their own. They think they know how to do research because it seems so easy. It's like turning on the television set. It's an appliance. You turn on Google and you put in the question and the answer comes back. So we have to think strategically about where we can intervene and get those teachable moments to teach students that actually doing legal research is more complicated today than it has ever been before. There's so many choices. Not only choices between online databases and print, when do you go to print and when do you go to online, but it's a very complicated process. So what I found at Yale is we've been offering more and more legal research courses. Continue to participate in the first semester course. It's just basically, I tell my librarians that teaching that course, just expect that maybe you can teach them that you're not going to learn how to do legal research in this course, that this is just a subpart of a much larger course, and to take one of the other courses that we offer later on. So, some students may never take these additional courses, so we've also intervened in the clinical programs. And we've got a liaison with the clinics, and what we found is that the demand is just overwhelming. Now all of the clinics are coming to us and wanting librarians to come into the clinics and do some sort of an introductory lecture on how to do research in that particular area of law.
And my guess is that law firm practitioners would be encouraging this, right? Because I think one of the things I've heard, certainly from our alums, is that we're sending out too many students into law firm practice who haven't got the best research skills, and they in fact then have to learn it too often on the job. It seems like the clinics could well be one of the environments in which we provide that instruction.
And so I think as a result of all that, what we've seen is that we're getting more and more questions that are require much more assistance than the past. It's not these 1 to 5 minute quick answers about where do you find the federal statutes or the federal reporter. It's more of research collaboration. How do I go about writing this paper? And they can actually take 1-2 hours, maybe repeated visits. And so the nature of the process of reference is changing.
Well, I think there's no doubt that all those things are necessary, and clearly the need to have better instruction, better understanding of how to practice legal research is an important thing. I should note, since you bring up that question in the context you did, that here in the room is one of our alumni, Morgan Varner, who has endowed a fund for the library to explore just those questions about how to make sure that these digitally knowledgeable students are able to do the kinds of legal research that
You're a lucky man that you've had this endowment.
Well, it's worked out very well because we have someone who has developed courses in that area. We teach an introduction to law office technology course that has a component on legal information literacy in it. We're introducing a new course this spring that's going to be taught on business information sources from that same perspective. So there certainly are things that you can do, and I think we've been lucky enough to have a fair amount of success with those. But we've talked now about the importance of the space, and we've talked now about legal research instruction, and we're still talking, I think, primarily about the role of the law library in support of students. Spaces for students to study, teaching students things, participating in the education of students. What's the role in the future or now for the academic library at research institutions, and I think all law schools are research institutions now, in support of the faculty? Our own staff, our reference librarians, certainly will tell you, if I were to ask them, what I tell them to focus on and what I'm most interested in the kinds of work they do is faculty services. Mm-hmm. And we've tried to do things here. That's one of the reasons why we established the open access repository, our support for empirical research. We have a research assistance program that we run, and all of those things. But I'm sure it's the same thing in your institutions as it is here. It's very rare to see a member of our faculty come into the library. Now, Don Horowitz is in the back, and he comes into the library. But, it's not as often as it was before. Why should they? We bring everything to their desks. Okay. And if I don't think things are going to change to bring the faculty back into the library. So then what's the role of the library in supporting scholarship and faculty research?
Yeah. I think it's to collaborate with them on their research, find out what they're doing, And we're seeing the kinds of research that faculty do change quite a bit. For example, as I mentioned, there's more and more empirical legal researchers at some of our law schools. You've got them here, and John's got them, I've got them, Paul's got them. I think that they're, and how can we support this group of faculty beyond the more traditional kinds of research that we've been used to supporting? And it's, it may be, as you're doing here, helping them create data sets, having somebody in your staff that knows something about statistical analysis software like Stata that can work with their students and their research assistants. It's, and it's just understanding the work they're doing and being in touch with it as much as possible and providing them with the kinds of research services that they need to support that work. So that's number one. I think it's analogous to the law firm environment. And what's happened in the law firms is lawyers stay in their offices. And they have less need to come into the library now. So the library physical space in law firms has pretty much disappeared. So our deans and our faculty that go in to visit in a law firm might get the impression as a partner tours them through that, oh, we no longer have a library. But in fact, they're spending more on libraries, librarians, and legal information than ever before. If looking at the survey of law firm libraries that was published in the American Lawyer last summer that surveyed the top 200 law firms in the country, I was astounded to see a 25% jump in the amount that their law firms, libraries, were paying for legal information over the year before. And not just for online information, for print information as well. The print is less visible. And also paying more for salaries. There's more librarians on the payroll, or at least they're getting paid more. So law firm libraries are very much alive, but they don't, associates have offices, so they don't need to come into the library to do the work. Students don't have offices, and so we need to provide this physical space for them as well as the support for their research that we do.
So as I've taken over this job in the last few months from Terry Martin, the great law librarian who did it for 27 years before me, who's just here, right, exactly. I've been trying to learn the job, right, and one of the ways I've been doing that is to go and speak with as many of my faculty colleagues as I can to see what they want and get a sense of how served they are, or how we can serve them going forward. And it's very clear to me that the Harvard Law Library has done an exceptional job, a very devoted group of reference librarians who have served the faculty extremely well for a long time as partners in just the way that you describe, and particularly for those faculty who have been there for a long time and those faculty for whom traditional legal research is the mode. We have the materials that they would like. It's increasingly available in very convenient formats. They ask for something, they get it very quickly, whether it's brought to them in a physical format or digitally and so forth. And we do that sort of core job of being a law library very, very well. It's expensive, of course, to do it, and it's important that we maintain our collections and so forth in this traditional mode, and it takes a lot of time and work, but that's done very, very well. My sense is that the people who have some greater level of frustration on our faculty are those who have come from other places often, people who are doing things in more interdisciplinary modes, and where the law library is not exactly set up in the way that they would think it might be to support their research. At the Harvard Law School, we've had a huge growth in new faculty members. We now have 42 new faculty members on a full-time basis in the last 5 years, and many of them are doing international work and many of them doing interdisciplinary work. So I think the challenge, at least for us, is to think about what does it mean to be a law library at our core, to be very, very good at that, provision of the traditional services, and not mess that up. We still have to do that very, very well. We have to invest enough in doing it very, very well. But then we also have to figure out if you're somebody who is doing legal research in a way that is like a social scientist, and many of the people who are coming onto the faculty, or some of the people, have PhDs and are doing work in a very different way. Do we buy a second set of the social science materials on some matter that other schools might have within the university? Do we provide them the same data sets that the business school might have Do we give them Bloomberg terminals, for instance? I think we've all had Bloomberg calling on us as they seek to expand their services in this area. Do we add to our reference librarians empiricists, just as you've described, postdocs, and so forth? I think the answer is yes, right? But at some point, I think the school has to decide whether or not that's something as a resource matter we want to do, is to have a group of reference librarians and the support behind that in technical services and otherwise, and the spend, the growing spend, to cover not just the legal materials, but also all these social science ones. So there are lots of gnarly problems buried in there, but the answer has to be yes. We have to be core partners to these international and interdisciplinary faculty, just as we are for classic doctrinalists doing U.S. law. But there is, at some point, quite a challenge coming ahead for, is this a zero-sum game, or is it something where we're going to figure out expansive ways to do it? I think it's wonderful that you have members of your alumni who are willing to give specific funds to deal with some of these more experimental, forward-looking things, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe the answer is law schools have to rely upon their forward-looking members of alumni to do it. But I think there's also some question of, how much of a core function is the law library, and as we expand the kinds of things we do, how do we do that, while maintaining what we've done well in the past?
Well, I think that's right. Do you have more?
Well, the cost of that information is very, very expensive. Not only are we expanding the base of information that we need to get because of this expanding interest, and we're blessed with very rich collections in print formats and with nice endowments to support that, but it's still beyond our means. And all of us are cutting our collections back and trimming the sails somewhat and redirecting those resources. Law firms are spending much more than even the Harvard Law Library on information resources. That was one of the things that sort of shocked me in looking at that survey. The average law firm is spending over $5 million a year on its information resources at the big law firm libraries, which is, I think, more than what Harvard is spending.
It is, in fact, yeah.
And you spend more than the rest of us.
But not much.
So it's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, so may I put it back in the form of a question to you? Let's say you've got an empiricist, to keep with this example, who is doing work on data sets related to something in the business world, in the corporate world. And the Yale School of Management has got all the materials that they need. Do you buy it at the Yale Law School Library? And likewise, do you repeat the things that the Yale School of Management has in skill sets?
Well, we're all blessed to be on very rich campuses with rich library resources. So I think we duplicate as little as possible. And we coordinate with the other libraries on campus, and we get those information resources where we can. And we think very carefully about how we expand our services. It was, again, Dick has shown us the way here on how to tiptoe into the empirical legal research world by bringing in a PhD student to help extend those services. And I think that's probably the way that we will venture into it to begin with.
Well, I think the best thing to think about that is that that's not necessarily a service for the faculty that needs to be done in the library. But the library does have, at some level, the resources and the flexibility to take initiatives in that direction. And, UCLA, for example, and other places have fairly large programs to support empirical research that aren't within the library. Yeah. But, here we thought we could make use of that and then see what develops out of it. And I think those are the sorts of things that libraries can do in terms of thinking about how to be creative with the resources that they have and look out in different directions. I think, well, I don't even know, one of you said that, the future was in collaboration, and you both agreed to it. And I think that's a key point, but you will know this. I mean, that's something that we talk about and have talked about forever. I'm pretty sure when you two were talking, I was thinking back to having written a paper way back when I was in library school a long time ago about how reference librarians could collaborate with faculty and with other people to make their jobs more fulfilling, and also to provide better support and create better relationships with the faculty with whom they're working. But this is stuff we talked about forever. And we have all these sorts of things working against us. Librarians aren't necessarily, particularly in law schools, as ready as we might like them to be to go out and say, Professor so-and-so, I want to meet with you for an hour, let's have lunch together, and I want to we do things that will collaborate with you. So there are cultural obstacles that make these things easier to say I think, than they are to do. There's also, the librarian ethos, the thing about the difference between reference service and research, because we do reference, but we don't do research because that's for your student assistants, so we don't want to dirty our hands in that direction. And,
Is that a joke or for real?
Oh, you don't know?
No, I've heard this too. I'm just curious what the real answer is.
Well, I think there will be different opinions in the room about that. But I think that I understand the distinction, but I also think it's one that becomes increasingly more and more difficult to justify, because on the one hand, if what you want is this meaningful collaborative relationship with the faculty, you can't sort of draw those lines as easily as you might have wanted to draw them before. And I've had many discussions with my former dean about just this very thing, in terms of thinking about it in terms of resource allocations within the institution. If you have Professor so-and-so, and there was a real-life example when we talked about it, who demands very little in terms of institutional resources for research assistants, for travel, for any of the other things that people can think of, things to ask for money to do, and they're very productive. There's somebody that Brian Leiter really likes, because they publish a lot of articles, they help us in the rankings and do all of these things. Yet, then they come to the library and they want somebody on the library staff to sort of do maybe a little bit more than what that line would indicate. And this didn't really happen here. It was more of a hypothetical kind of situation. I think the point that the dean made was that from an institutional perspective, since this person is very productive and is using very few resources otherwise, you can bend that line a little bit if they ask you to do something that may not be quite what you think about as doing reference. And those are the kinds of things where I think the decisions are more complicated and more difficult now than they should be before. So.
Yeah. Well, there is that concern of getting overextended and just biting off, get into this research assistance land. It can go down and just totally, one faculty member could totally eat up a librarian.
But one of the things we've tried to do here, that happens all the time. One of these things that we've tried to do here that I'm not sure has been as successful as I wished it would be, but again, these things aren't easy, is what we started thinking about here was what are the resources that a faculty member has available to him or herself in doing their research. So they've got the library, they've got the librarian, of course. They have their faculty support person. They have their personal research assistant who they pay for. And then we have this research assistant program where for projects of fewer than 10 hours, we'll give them a trained research assistant to do those projects if they come through the library to do that. So you've got a lot of different alternatives to do that. And it's not clear why the faculty member ought to have to sit and figure out who's the best person to solve this problem. And one way to think about doing this, which I think makes sense, is that you organize those potentially 4 different sorts of resources into a team of some sort that then can triage the requests. And who should manage that team? Should it be the student research assistant? Should it be the faculty support person? Or should it be the reference librarian? And I think what we've tried to do here, I can't see all of who's in the room, but we've tried to finesse that here so that it is indeed the librarian who manages it, but we never really try to say so. But I think those are the kinds of roles too that to get around that, not doing the research assistant work, you try to involve yourself with all the people who are providing this kind of support and help guide it, because ultimately it is the reference librarian who's going to have the best information about who should solve a particular problem.
And going back to this question of the centrality or the importance of the law librarian in a digital age, one of the things we've found recently is that in talking one-on-one with faculty members, we say, what's the topic you're interested in? They'll describe a particular project in, relating to the city of Sao Paulo and some legal issue there. And we'll say, well, you could get the information you're interested in through one of the online resources we have for you. So much of this has been digitized. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on these data sets. And the faculty member says, I try. I type in Sao Paulo-city or whatever into this thing, and I get simultaneously too much and too little. is what he says. So we could be doing self-help in these resources, but the electronic resources are a complete maze to me, and I get stuff that's unusable, and I get frustrated, and then I give up basically, and I don't look up that information. So I think one of the keys in this moment of transition is not just that we have digitally savvy young people coming in, but we have digitally not always so savvy faculty members in some cases who are struggling with this. They in fact wish that they could walk in and pull the book off the shelf and browse and say, oh gee, that's the one I want, and have learned in this particular way. So I think that says to me a couple things. One, it says we can't rush too fast to an all-digital world. And we need to maintain the hybrid collection. There are lots of other reasons, archivally, and for other sound sort of long-term reasons that we don't want to do this kind of purely virtual version of a library. We actually need stacks for books sometimes. But a second is that we need to focus on user interfaces, ways to get at all of this information that we're paying for, and also guides, right? So this comes back, I think, to the role of either the reference librarian in this example or the student research assistant, which is to both be guides to the stuff that we're paying for, which is very expensive, as well as educators of senior faculty members who are actually not getting as much as they used to, despite the proliferation of this information and the high costs that we're paying for it.
Yeah, I think the ideal solution is the research assistant working with the reference librarian and the faculty member. So what we see happening is research assistants coming into our library and working on a project for 2 weeks, and then they go to a librarian, and the librarian finds the answer in 10 minutes.
Right.
So,
and this probably mimics life in a law firm too, to some extent, right? Or in a legal environment where you've got the junior associate who's trying to get something for the senior partner, and you've got maybe a law firm librarian or a senior associate somewhere in the mix. It's not dissimilar, this kind of team orientation to getting the relevant information and packaging it in a way that the senior person then can help analyze it.
and Dick has suggested a nice solution for this, for having the librarian be in control of all of this and have a...
Well, I said manage.
Just a little
manage.
Right?
Yes,
Control, right?
yes. Better than being managed by the research assistant.
I see now the job of the library director is really an empire building. You need to come up with all these reasons why it should be centralized in law library.
One could argue your empire has already been built.
I see. Well, that's thanks to Terry, not to me. But, yeah.
Well, I would like to give you all a chance to ask any questions of our friends, if you have them, and I hope that you will. I certainly will call on my professional colleagues if we don't get any responses. Do you have any questions? Dave, has your question been answered?
Well, I'm not sure that it has.
Ah.
I mean, I can get anything I want, just type, if I can type a high revised code section such, and it pops right up on the computer. Nobody uses books for legal research anymore, do they?
Well, walking around your library today, I was interviewing students, and I interviewed some of your Duke Law Journal students, and they said that there is information that they cannot find online, that they have to go to print resources. They pointed out some statutory material and even some stuff that they have to use microforms for. And so they have requested from the library a portable microform reader that they had in their little Duke Law Journal room. So maybe you can find everything you need, but others may have not be quite as sophisticated researchers, or may have research needs that just kind of go beyond the kinds of materials that you're looking for yourself.
Deborah.
I have a question that Dick will find utterly predictable based on conversations that we've had. I'm in charge of the Duke University Library, certainly in library system, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying about interdisciplinary work and new kinds of clientele and different kinds of questions. So I would like your ideas on how you think the relationship of the law library with the main library system is changing or not changing, or could change or could improve, or could, what kinds of new forms of collaboration we might come up with. And all this in the context of the changing needs and the ease with which people are finding information on their own these days.
Here's the dirty secret, is in law schools, our faculty are so spoiled and get such great service. It's way beyond the service that any other faculty member on campus gets. And so that's why we have independent law libraries, and so that we can actually provide that.
A non-law school faculty member who is dabbling, let's say, or moving in some research-related way into legal issues.
Yes, we welcome that person to come over to the law library.
Suck them away from the main library system by treating them so well.
They need to get a joint appointment and have an office over in the law school.
A lot of those.
Yes.
So maybe just 2 ways into this, but I'm so new at the job that this is idle speculation more than anything else. But born of problems that we've seen in 2 months. One is the frustration that researchers at other parts of our university feel when they can't get access to some things that are in the Harvard Law Library in digital format because of the licensing that we've gotten. So in this particular set of examples, we have a series of things that we pay a great deal of money for, and we'd love to get licenses for the whole university, but the way that the contracting has worked, it's limited by our faculty members. That seems to me a crazy outcome, right? That in a university setting, that we would be denying researchers at other parts of the university access to it. But likewise, we have the same reciprocity problem with our business school, say, which buys lots of other things. So it seems to me that one form of collaboration and collective action is around the negotiation of licenses around these electronic resources. There has to be more market power in what we're doing, either as the creators of the information or as the primary buyers of it, that we should be able to break down this sort of particularly silly boundary. I think the other, though, goes to the core question of not are the libraries collaborating so much across these boundaries, but are the faculty themselves collaborating much? At least within Harvard, we have, it's the most stovepipe place you can imagine in many respects, where people could be working in a very similar field. I work in the study of the internet, and there are, dozens of other faculty at every other school that are studying these things. And it's a bear to figure out how do we actually work together. My sense would be if the underlying problem were solved somehow, we figured out ways that we were collaborating better, I think likewise our respective reference librarians and those who are doing the collection would also do it. Now, this is Pollyanna-ish, I totally get it. The incentive structure for getting tenure and so forth is you produce on your own and you do it really well, and at least in our field. So it runs against some of these incentives, but somehow it's related, I think, to that core question of how do we collaborate on research, not just how do we collaborate in sharing resources.
But I think there's also an argument to be made, and Harvard may be the prototypical stovepipe kind of place. Duke makes a real effort to try to be multidisciplinary, to encourage collaboration between the schools, among individual faculty members. And I think in that kind of environment, despite what Blair has alluded to as the traditional severe independence and autonomy of the law library from other campus libraries, and there certainly are limits to which I will not cross in that. I think that if the culture of the university is one that encourages interdisciplinary sort of work, then perhaps the libraries working together have the possibility to create a structure to make that happen, even given the disciplinary basis of promotion and tenure and all of those things. So in those cases, I think there's a possibility of doing things, and I don't think you can hold on so tightly to that autonomy that we prize so much.
But I think that's the link between the university librarian and the provost, it seems to me, or whatever the equivalent is in the school. It seems like if those two units and people are pulling together, I think there's a lot more that will happen than
that's
otherwise.
right. That's right as well.
I don't want to leave the impression that we don't work together with our university libraries. I mean, I meet together with my colleagues once a week in the university library system, the directors of all the campus libraries and the associate university librarians, and we have great cooperative relationships. They deliver.
Because this is webcast and recorded, so when they play it back, Blair, they will.
We could not provide the kinds of services to our faculty and students that we do without the rest of the university library system. They deliver books right to our doorstep, and we deliver books to their doorsteps. All our materials and our negotiation of licensing for databases that we purchase, it's always for campus-wide access. Sometimes we just cannot get the vendor to agree, and You know, it's the Lexis and Westlaw, I think, are the prime offenders there. Most of them agree, and we have campus-wide access, and we benefit so much from the campus digital resources that are licensed. We also, like Harvard, I think, have a joint campus shelving facility. So we cannot fit all of our print materials in our library.
Oh, we do the same thing.
Yeah, so.
And as of this year, more than half the Harvard collection is offsite.
Yeah.
We're about a third, yeah.
It's a competition, apparently.
How much can we get out? How many books can we kick out here?
Are there other questions? Mr. Professor Metzlaff, let me not demean you.
I wouldn't have predicted the world that we have now 10 years ago with Wikipedia, which sometimes is very interesting and useful, and how my students access information. What's 10 years from now? Is there some legal Google that's going to be created that will, you know, where is all this going in terms of research, given the internet and these databases? It's beyond my ability to comprehend.
John and I are probably going to have different answers to this, but first let me invite you to a conference at Yale on December 12th, sponsored by the Yale University Press, that is going to be addressing the future of the book. And our former faculty member and now John's colleague at Harvard, Yochai Benkler, who's written quite a bit about the digital world, is going to be one of the speakers at that event. But what I can tell is it predicts a very bright and positive future for the printed book. I think that we will continue to see print as an important format well into the future, but more and more digital, obviously. Are we going to see the equivalent of a digital? Yes, they're digitizing, Google is digitizing books left and right. I think Harvard's pulled back a little bit on what they're doing with the Google, but they've done Michigan, and they're doing Stanford, and they're digitizing away. So great. As I talked to some of the Duke students today about looking at materials in digital format, again, some of your law journal students, they said they like to look them up, and these are the born digital students. They like to find them digitally, but then look at them in print, whether that means printing them out, which seems to be not a very green way about doing it, or using a library copy. They prefer, if it's going to be more than a couple of screens to read, they prefer to look at it. John and I both have an Amazon Kindle and have, and I had predecessors to that, and I have it with me, and I've been reading Nixonland on my Amazon Kindle.
I thought we had an agreement about it.
But we're talking about nothing but Nixon all day. I can't quite understand why. But.
Getting ready for Duke. So take it from there.
So obviously, predicting the future is a dangerous business, and I'm no good at it. But some people on this faculty, Jamie Boyle and Jen Jenkins and others at the study of the public domain here, are leaders in thinking about it. So if they're successful in some of the things that they're doing, I think it will be a brighter future 10 years from now. I think some of the answer will come down to what kind of materials you're talking about. So to this point about looking up a statute, my guess is 10 years from now, primary legal materials in any country that has resources will be freely available and in good, formal, sort of stable formats. There are lots of efforts in this regard. I just think that the basic core statutory case law, those kinds of things will be in digital format. For everything else, my sense is it will be born in digital format. So think about the Wall Street Journal today, or any other newspaper. It's born as a digital object or a book. We write it. It's a Microsoft Word file first, right? The fact that we print it out in this kind of a format is an artifact. It's a good artifact. It's a great technology, actually, the book, and is one of them. But I think it'll come out in 4 or 5 or 6 different formats. So you'll have the choice of having the highly searchable one, whether it's through Google Books or Google Scholar. You'll have one that's in Amazon Kindle and the Sony Reader. You might have a one that has an interactive quality to it with video and audio and so forth. Or you'll buy the one at Borders or through Amazon. So my sense is that what we'll get good at is price discrimination among these different formats based on a born digital object, which is then output in ways that are useful for that particular purpose or the particular audience. But that's a hopeful version of the future.
Good.
May I add to that? When you ask if there's a Google legal, Google really is going after a Google legal collection, and the U.S. Government Printing Office has an RFP out right now to digitize the entire legacy collection of all government documents, so everything will be freely available to everybody at some point. Every state in the U.S. is looking at doing its right part for making the primary sources of law available in an authenticated and preserved manner, but in digital format for everybody, and they will be going back to, we presume. So the rapidity with which the change is happening is faster than I think any of us predicted it. But there is also, at the very same time, an ongoing effort for permanent preservation of the printed object from which these things are digitized if they were not born digital, and preserving the born digital copy at some point too. So there will be light archives and dark archives of all this information should anything ever need to be replicated if it's destroyed for some reason. But that's going to happen within the next fewer than 10 years.
I think one of the hard problems that we'll have to ask ourselves is actually kind of a flip of this, which is of your scholarship and the work that you're doing as a faculty member, how are we going to preserve that to the extent that you're creating things that may be not, in fact, preserved in the ordinary format? We have to rethink what the archives are. Do we want to archive a lot of the emails, right, which are actually a very tricky matter? Technically, it's tricky, but it's also tricky. Do you want all of it saved, of the articles and other outputs and the, videos of your classes and so forth? Should we be saving those things? I think for a dean today who may be, or a senior faculty member who may be someone that the historians someday will look at, it's a live question that we should be asking.
And it's particularly one for Tom because a lot of his work is videos, so we have all sorts of special problems preserving that. Terry? Oh, Carol, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Well, this was more of a retro kind of a question because as we're talking about the electronic resources and the need for print, one of the reasons that we continue to need print is that all lawyers don't have access to these electronic resources. Some of them go out and practice in small firms that really can't afford, the $5 million budgets. So that's one reason we have to also keep a variety of formats.
And also the skills to use those books, right? I mean, think of the public interest lawyer who comes out knowing only how to use Westlaw, right? Who goes into a place where they're actually pulling stuff off the shelves. That, I think, is a live problem.
Terry?
So let me go back to your initial question. Do we need law libraries? I think you've made the case for the library as place. Every law school should have a good place for the students to go. You've made the case for the sophisticated reference librarian who can assist the faculty members and help them structure their research, find resources, manage information, teach the students. I'm not sure you've made the case for separate collections in any format. Because if the collections are moving digitally, why is every law school library licensing information from Lexis and Westlaw? Why is, why aren't there bigger conglomerates that are spending the time, and why aren't there bigger groups that are doing those negotiations and maybe coming to better conclusions? When I started in this business, I often looked at a lot of our collection, the law reviews and the reporters, as kind of intermediate copies, because the used copies were the ones that got taken to the photocopy machine and people took home. Now you can get it online, so people download it to their laptops. The role of the library is only kind of a licensor, but every law school is doing the same kind of negotiations. That seems kind of silly. Maybe we should just let John negotiate for the country, and we'll just.
You didn't say that a couple of years ago.
A terrible idea.
But
You didn't
Terry,
say that a couple of years ago.
do you think that Lexis or Westlaw would sell it to us for less money if John was doing the negotiations for all of
Surely
that?
not.
Yeah.
Surely not.
I
But
think they need to.
that's part of the problem of libraries.
pretty good deals from them. I'm not.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not worried. I mean, but the problem is, except for Lexis Light, you know, you don't have university access. But then there's some of these other resources that are hard to. But
I think,
if you look at if you look at what West has done with the LMA, there are different deals with every school, you know. Whereas if AALS did it for us, you know.
So surely the answer is yes, right? We should be in the business of doing this. But I think, you know, you guys clearly have done a lot of work on collaboration in the past that is tricky to do. I think one area where it seems to me important, we haven't talked that much about international collections, but one of the things that we puzzle over a lot at the Harvard Law School is we try to collect in all jurisdictions in the world, at least at some level, the basic law. And in places, regimes that are unstable, it's important that someone is collecting that. But we can't buy all the, you know, despite how much money we have, you cannot buy everything in every jurisdiction, right? So it seems like one way in which to do greater sharing might be in this other zone. We probably buy very similar things, I would think, in US law, but we probably buy quite different things in other jurisdictions. And as all of our leading law schools anyway are seeking to have a more international experience for our students and draw in other LLMs and SJDs and so forth, that seems to me a crucial thing for us to do together, even if it's not negotiating the West agreement together. It might be negotiating what we're strong in.
See, John, we're all hoping that you don't pull back on that foreign and international law commitment because the rest of us rely on you.
I'm not sure that's the note I want to end on. But I think we probably reached a time when everybody will be ready to go off to the reception, and I want you all to join me in thanking these folks for coming down and having this conversation. And before you leave, of course, we do want to mark your presence here by giving you each an appropriate gift for joining us here today at Duke. And I think it'd be only fair for the two of you. You don't get both. It would only be fair for the two of you to open up your gifts and show them to our audience.
Have to. This was
I can guess.
They will appreciate
A
it.
bobblehead.
You're so good.
oh, this is excellent. So it is.
Oh, no, I got it.
Must be an inside librarian joke.
It's a Blue Devil bobblehead.
Oh. I was hoping it was going to be a Richard Nixon bobblehead.
Yes, I know.
Thank you. Congratulations.